G'day, I'm Scott Sanders.
I'm Derek Hanna.
Welcome to The One Thing, a podcast designed to give you one solid, practical, gospel-centered ministry tip every week.
Yep, and Scott, Australian Open just finishing up here. Gee, that's been a roaring success. What's been your favourite thing?
The crowds have been electric.
Crowds have been amazing. Yep, all the crowds they deserve.
Well, it is interesting watching it in the midst of a pandemic with no crowds. In some ways, it's kind of nice, isn't it? That even the sporting events are impacted. For the most part, because the cricket wasn't over the last few weeks. The cricket wasn't. Yet church life was. So you could go to the cricket, sing, be a hoon, can't go to church, and
can't be a hoon at church, can you?
Can't be a hoon at church.
No. Anyway, well, One Thing's brought to you thanks to Geneva Push, the Australian Church Planning Network. Over the past 10 years, we've helped around 100 churches across Australia plant in Australia, and we are aiming for 200 more by 2030. That's a big number, but that's what we're praying and we're working towards. But for now, you've pressed play on another episode of The One Thing, two-part episode this week, a two-banger. Refresh your staff meetings.
Now, what's the aim of the episode, Derek?
Oh, that's a great question. We want to help you think through your staff meetings, refresh them. They are one of those things you just kind of rinse and repeat every week, and it's worthwhile pausing and reflecting. And we'll hear from a couple of people, Ray Galea, Mike Sams, John Rumble. You'll get introduced to them as they've thought through over the years how it is they re-envisage, pull apart the staff meeting, put them back together, so that they actually drive towards what it is that they as a church are doing, what they value, all those kinds of things. So that's what we're going to be doing this week.
Now, if you're not a senior pastor and you're listening to this and you're thinking, this is my staff team, you might want to gently put this, in a message to your senior minister and say, hey, can you have a listen to this episode?
Just leave it on a floppy disk on his desk, and he might accidentally play it. Yep.
Okay, let's listen to our first clip. Ray Galea from MBM Rudy Hill.
Hi friends, Ray Galea here. I've just been asked about anything we do in staff meeting that might be helpful to share. Many years ago now, it's probably about 7 or 8 years ago, we worked on a principle of bringing to the staff meeting 3 questions. Question number 1, is there anyone who's become a Christian? So the point there is we want to make mission the centre of what we do, and we want to celebrate it. So we hear, and it can be a 5-year-old, it can be a 55-year-old, it can be from one of the campuses, but we're always hearing and celebrating about who's moved from death to life, and that's always worth rejoicing. Second thing is, second question, who can we invite to our Explaining Christianity course? So we're keeping everyone missionally minded. It doesn't matter what department you're in, especially after a Sunday, there's conversations are had by so many people that as a result of that, there's always someone who you can put on a sheet, on a list, that then from there, when you've got the next course, you can call up and you get a whole list of names that can easily fall off the radar unless you note them. Third one is, who's worth watching? And we're really looking for potential leaders, and at the end of every year, we then go to that list to then appoint them or consider appointing them into a leadership group that we run. And so it just keeps leadership, mission, and the gospel centre stage.
Okay, so Ray helpfully talks about 3 regular questions that he asks in staff meetings. So first one, is there anyone who's become a Christian over the weekend? Who can we invite to Explaining Christianity course? And then the last one, who's worth watching? So he's really focusing on mission, he's focusing on the new person at church, and then the last one, potential leaders. Really good questions to ask each week. Now, thoughts, Derek?
Oh, I love the questions. They're great. There were a couple of things I really loved about this. And one question I had that I need you to answer, Scott. Here's the things I loved about it. As Ray says in the audio he had, it's mission at the center for them. And so they keep putting on the table a thing that drives who they are, what they do, who they want to reach, the people around them, in order to help people move forward. And so that's just that constant reminder of the vision that they have and how they do it. Those first 2 questions are just brilliant. So I love that about it. Here's the second thing I loved about it. It can feel like with those questions, when you ask them every week, what movement has there been from last week? Like, it's not a very long gap that 7 days if you're having staff meetings every single week. But what they do, rather than saying, okay, we're going to call this person this week for the leadership, let's take the potential leaders one, they're building a list. And so they're doing that as a staff team, building this. So when they get to the point of running a Christianity Explored course, or they get to the point of running a building leaders course or training them up, they've got that list. They don't have to go back and think about it. So there's this deliberateness that builds throughout the year to the key moments they might have. They don't have to run 8 Christianity Explored courses every single year. I think you want to be running 4, but they've got this list of people they can call and contact, build a list of leaders. I love that deliberateness about it. What did you like about it?
Well, in it, there's a growth mindset as well, isn't there? So there's an expectation that we'll have newcomers. There's an expectation that people will be making decisions. And so it's not a kind of, name it and claim it, but there's an expectation that as we see people come into church, gather with us, that they'll be making decisions for Christ, that they'll be, wanting to move towards making a decision to Christ. So I think for those first 2 mission questions, the growth expectation is really helpful to have as a staff team. Now, you kind of said perhaps they're better on a quarterly basis where you can actually see trends. You can say, wow, over this last quarter we've seen, this. But doing it every week says every week church is about actually the outsider and ensuring that, we're capturing their names. Second thing as well with the potential leader one, Ray's context is Western Sydney. He's not near, there is a university nearby, but it's not like he's got a university context or a university population. I think there's a deliberateness in asking that question because you want to be intentional about raising up leaders, but also getting the staff team to be identifying that and seeing that that's their role. Because often it's the senior minister whose role is to sort of tap people on the shoulder. But if everyone on the staff team is thinking about it, they're being deliberate about, okay, who's the next person I can be raising up?
All right, let me push into it. Here's my question that I want you to solve for me. And in fact, you've just touched on there. You made the comment, and I think you'll probably want to qualify this comment after I push it back at you. You made the comment, church is about the outsider. Now, I want to say in these 3 questions, I know that MBM, I know for a fact that they pastoral care is right at the forefront, caring for the flock. It's interesting that question isn't in that 3 question. And you've made the comment, church is about the outsider. So talk to me about how it is that the pastoral care for church fits into that.
The reality is most churches, most of their systems are set up for, pastoral care, set up for seeing people go deep in the Word. Small groups, our gatherings, we open up the Word, we hear God's Word preached. And so I think you have to ask that question because most of our systems are set up that way. If your church had mission as a focus and it was pumping and thriving, then perhaps you might want to be asking the community question or the deep in word question each week, just to be saying, okay, which of our people are growing and are we seeing people in community? But I think for most of our churches, the issue is, mission isn't at the centre, and raising up leaders isn't at the centre. So again, a healthy church is asking those other questions, maybe not just every week, because there's a deliberateness about putting it on the agenda of every staff member.
Yep.
So in this next clip, Mike Sams, who planted a church with the Holy Trinity Network in Adelaide, talks about staff meetings when you actually don't have staff. So when you've got your volunteer core launch team for a church plant. Let's take a listen.
If you lead a small church and you're maybe the only employed person in the church, maybe you have some key lay people around you who volunteer their time, how can you have a staff meeting when there's no one else in the traditional sense to have a meeting with? I think there's a few things that you can do that actually make a meeting worthwhile. Firstly, being flexible. Now, it might sound obvious, but it makes a lot of sense if you've got key leaders, key volunteers who get on with the ministry with you, who have time available to them, that you're flexible enough to organise the weekly meetings when they're free and not just when it's the most ideal time or that suits you the most. Secondly, when you have these meetings, I think we can achieve more than reading the Bible and just talking about what happened on a Sunday and what we got to get done for the next Sunday. And while reading the Bible is absolutely essential, of course, it's the heart of everything that we do is God and His Word, and that's part of it. When we come to talking about what's happened, and what we're going to do in the coming weeks, we don't want it just to be a talk fest. Instead, if we think about with clarity what we're trying to achieve, it really helps those lay volunteers know what they're working on and why they're doing it. And so framing those discussions around what the goals are, whatever language you use, whether it's goals, purposes, priorities, outcomes, whatever, but having clarity is really helpful for a lay kind of staff meeting. And thirdly, and I think it's probably the most important, is that you get into the habit of this meeting being a meeting that has a priority of mobilizing the rest of church. That is, it doesn't become a bottleneck that all these people do the ministry because they just happen to be the ones that are available in a time that works for you to have a meeting. So the thinking is, how do we facilitate good systems and communicate in formal and informal ways to the key leaders in the church who can get on with the ministry and mobilise everyone else as well?
Okay, so just a couple of things that Mike Sams, I think, helpfully raises in terms of thinking about staff teams with a volunteer team. Be flexible. It's more than just reading the Bible, discussing Sunday and upcoming tasks. So, Derek, before you come back at a question, yes, you want to be doing those things in a staff meeting. It's really important to be discipling and opening up God's word together.
My heresy radar was going off there.
And then the third point there, use the meeting to mobilise those at church who aren't at the meeting. So flexibility, Derek, you're quite flexible. Some would say overly flexible. Not your hammies, but in terms of just your practice. Being flexible so that you can involve your volunteer team. Tell us about the difficulties of that.
Yes. Well, look, it is tricky when you're small like that because you are the only person who is free during the day generally, unless you've got people who are at university, you've got that kind of context. So everyone else is working. So you do just have to work out a time to be able to meet with the key people on a regular basis. And so generally with people in ministry, our time is much freer than it would be for people who have to work certain hours. So doing it at night times, possibly even doing it on Sundays after the service, if that's where people work, just finding a time to be able to regularly touch base and tap into those key values, lay the vision on the table, those kind of things. It's up to you in a small context to do that.
Now, Mike says it's more than just reading the Bible, so you want to frame your discussions around the purposes. Mike's very intentional with his sort of staff meeting plan, working through the big strategic priorities, but then thinking purposefully about the church. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, and this is always a tension, I think, isn't it? At least in our Reformed heritage, we naturally and healthily want to drive back to the Bible in those contexts, and we need to keep that on the table. We need to do it. There is that tension though of how much time within the space that you've got you give to that, and I think that's a tension to be managed. You've got to work out enough time to, as we'll hear a little bit later from someone else who talks about this. Those meetings, those connections are about discipleship. But there are certain things in terms of our role as overseers of the church, as leaders within the church, that we do need to keep coming back to and asking about. So within the time, however you break it up, it's not always going to be exactly the same time. You do want to keep pushing back to what are the reasons we're here, what are the things we need to tap into, what are the purposes that we have set up, however you want to phrase it. Enough time to be able to do that each week so you're heading in the direction that you want to head.
And a key part of that is actually, I guess, teaching, developing so you can actually hand over significant responsibility. So by regularly going to it, you're actually getting the whole team to be thinking about each of the purposes, but also thinking about how their area impacts with the others. So there's a removal of silos, and you're setting up a culture from the start that says actually we're all on about these things, but I've particularly got this person on this area, particularly got this person on that area, and as a church plant, you kind of want to be from the start setting that foundation and setting that culture for each of those areas.
And you see that in Ray's questions before as well, don't you? That everyone is talking about, who can we invite to Christianity Explained? Who is it that might be a potential leader? Everyone's asking that because that is everyone's question. That's everyone's vision, not just some people who might run the M's or who might run the, whatever it is. So, yeah. Scott, talk to us about that one then. This third bit, using the meeting to mobilise those at church who aren't at the meeting.
So I think Mike helpfully raises the deliberateness of this, purpose team, this core launch team. A key part of what they're doing is actually working through the body and working through the whole of church. And so a key part of any staff meeting that they have is actually thinking into the next steps for people in church life to be actually ensuring that the whole church is moving forward. So I think there's often action is for us as a staff team to be doing it, or us as a leadership team to be doing it, but actually being deliberate and saying, okay, who in the church can be helping you, assisting you with this? Who on your team is actually going to help you achieve that outcome and that action that you've come out of the meeting. So Derek, there was a lot in this episode, and really good to hear from both Ray and Mike. Was there an aha moment for you?
Yeah, I think the aha moment, I referred to this before, the aha moment for me was staff meetings aren't just meetings that happen in isolation. They're part of a cumulative effect around praying and gathering and refocusing vision over the course of a year. That list building stuff seems like a very simple, obvious thing, but that for me was just a really helpful thing to say. Each week we come back to the same things and we build that over time. That was my aha moment. How about you?
Well, I was just going to say, in our next episode, we're going to be pushing into sort of the different meetings and the purposes of them. And so I think that's going to be really an important one to listen into as well. And we'll also open up the toolbox in our next episode as well and have a chance to think about some resources. For me, I love, Ray's question, who has become a Christian at church this week? I just think that's a really easy, simple question that every, church staff team can have that really, gets you celebrating, God willing, regularly. Hey, this person's come to faith in Christ, but also puts mission at the center of your time together.
Yep, that's great. Well, this is the first part of a two-part episode, and we're going to pause and we're going to encourage you to tune into part 2 next week, which will include the one thing and will include the toolbox, but you're just going to have to wait 7 days for that one. The next episode features John Rumble from Providence Church in Perth. He has done a total reset of the staff meetings at Providence. So,
I'm Scott Sanders.
I'm Derek Hanna.
Chat soon.